The withdrawal notice arrived at the human outpost in the Valen corridor on Cycle 41. It was not addressed to anyone in particular. The Dravathi Empire did not bother with names when dealing with species they had already decided were finished. The message was short: 30 cycles to remove all personnel, vessels, and installations from the corridor. After that, anything human-made would be treated as debris. Fleet Commander Sarath read the confirmation report on the bridge of his cruiser and said nothing for a moment. Then he set it down and told his communications officer to log it as delivered. The humans had received the notice. That was all that mattered. The corridor had been contested for 11 years, and the Empire had been patient. Now the patience was done. His patrol formation, 3 cruisers moving in a slow arc through the central sector, had been doing this run for 6 years without incident. No human vessel had challenged them directly in 2 years. Sarath believed, without arrogance, simply as a matter of observed fact, that the humans had already accepted they could not hold this space. The notice was just paperwork now. His second officer asked if he expected any response. Sarath said no. He was not wrong about that exactly. There was no response. There was no transmission from any human vessel or installation in the corridor. Nothing moved. Nothing powered up. The sector was quiet the same way it had been quiet for weeks. What Sarath did not know, and had no way to know, was that the quiet was not emptiness. It was weight. Deep inside the debris field that stretched across the corridor's sensor shadow, something enormous was holding still. The field was old. A dead system scattered remains, rocks the size of small cities drifting in loose clusters. It was the worst place in the corridor for active scanning. Sensors bounced wrong in there, returns came back confused, and no Dravathi captain had ever seen a reason to push a ship through it when the open lanes were right there. The humans had noticed that 11 months ago. USCS Relentless had been dark for 19 days. No drive emission. No active sensor ping. No heat signature above the background noise of the rocks around it. The ship was more than 2 kilometers long, and it was sitting inside that field like a held breath. Every non-essential system was off. The crew worked in low light, spoke in low voices not because they had to, but because the ship had that kind of feeling right now. Still, waiting. Admiral Rael Voss stood at the back of the bridge and watched the passive display. It showed the 3 Dravathi cruisers moving through their patrol arc on the far side of the corridor. Tiny signatures, easy to read. They were not hiding. They had no reason to. One of the junior sensor operators, a young man named Tavo, turned in his chair and said quietly that the cruisers had not changed course. Voss nodded once. Tavo asked if they were expecting more ships soon. Voss said yes. In about 8 cycles, the reinforcement fleet would arrive at the corridor's central relay station. 8 warships, possibly more. The Empire was done waiting, and they would send enough force to make the sweep look easy. Tavo asked what they were going to do. Voss looked at the display for a moment. The cruisers, the debris field, the long, dark corridor stretching out in every direction. He said, "Wait." Tavo turned back to his console. Commander Petra Sung was at her station on the far side of the bridge, running passive array checks for the 4th time that day. She did not look up. She had heard the exchange and did not need to add anything to it. She had spent 9 weeks building the targeting model for this operation. Every Dravathi patrol route, every known ship class in the reinforcement fleet, every relay station frequency, every fuel transfer window. She knew the formation the Empire would arrive in before they did. She had already decided what she was going to do about it. She just needed them to get here first. Chief Basu came up from the lower engineering decks and stood near the bridge entrance for a moment, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at the passive display, looked at Voss, and said the stealth envelope was holding clean. No leaks, no thermal drift above threshold. Voss thanked him. Basu nodded and went back down. The Relentless drifted. Rocks moved around it in their slow, ancient orbits. The three Dravathi cruisers completed their arc and began the return leg. In the corridor beyond, 6 human outposts were running on skeleton crews, making just enough noise to look occupied, just enough activity to look normal. They were not bait exactly, they were stage dressing. The real thing was already in position. Sarath's report, filed that evening to Grand Admiral Seth, said the corridor was quiet and the withdrawal notice had been delivered without incident. He described the human presence in the corridor as reduced and declining. He assessed the probability of organized resistance as low. He filed that report 19 days after the Relentless had already gone dark inside the debris field. The answer to the Empire's ultimatum had been in motion for 3 weeks before the ultimatum was ever sent. The reinforcement fleet did not arrive quietly. 8 Dravathi warships dropped out of transit in close formation, right on schedule, engines burning full as they decelerated toward the corridor's central relay station. They were loud the way powerful things are loud when they see no reason not to be. Active sensors sweeping in every direction. Identification beacons broadcasting. 2 of the ships were cruiser class and the other 6 were a mix of assault carriers and support vessels. Together, they massed more firepower than anything the humans had ever stationed in this corridor. They took up anchor positions around the relay station and began coordinating with Sarath's patrol formation. The plan was simple. In 4 cycles, once the rest of the withdrawal window closed, they would move through the corridor in a single formation and remove whatever the humans had left behind. The relay station crew calculated it would take 2 days. None of them looked at the debris field. It had no value. Nothing moved in it. There was no reason to spend scant time on a rock cluster when there were 6 human outposts making faint transmissions in the far sectors. Inside the Relentless, Petra Sung was very busy. She had the passive arrays running on a narrow-angle sweep, not enough to be detected, just enough to pull the thermal and electromagnetic signatures off each ship as it settled into position. The Dravathi were talkative when they felt safe. Every active beacon, every nav pulse, every engine-cooled-on signature told her something. She built a picture of the formation the way a careful person builds something that needs to last. One data point at a time. No assumptions. No shortcuts. By the time the fleet had been at anchor for 3 hours, she knew which ship was the command vessel. She knew which 2 ships were carrying the bulk of the fleet's fuel reserves. She knew the frequencies the relay station used to talk to the fleet, and she knew which of those frequencies was encrypted and which ones were not. She knew the patrol pattern the Empire would run during the anchor period. She turned in her chair and looked at Voss. She said, "They lined up for us, Admiral." Voss looked at her display for a moment without speaking. Then he asked how confident she was in the command ship identification. She said 91%. The signal patterns matched the class profile, and the formation deference was consistent. He nodded. He asked about the fuel ships. She said both were confirmed. They were staying close together on the far edge of the formation, away from the cruisers. Voss looked at the display a little longer. 8 ships, full formation, already planning. He told her to begin Phase 1. Petra turned back to her console and brought up the drone release interface. The Relentless carried 48 silent drones, small, dark, no active systems. They moved on trajectory burns only. Once released, they coasted, no propulsion signature, no heat, nothing to see. They were not fast. They were patient. She selected 2 clusters of 12 and set their trajectories. The math was not complicated. The Dravathi fleet was not moving. The drones had time. She ran the paths 3 times to be sure, then released both clusters through the low-pressure vents on the ship's underside. No sound. No vibration. The drones drifted out into the dark and the rocks and began their long, slow coast toward the formation. It would take 14 hours. Nobody on the Relentless slept much during those 14 hours, but nobody made a production of it either. Tavo kept the passive arrays clean and called out any formation changes. of which there were two minor, both within the drift margins Petra had already accounted for. She adjusted the drone trajectories twice with small correction burns that lasted less than a second each. The Dravathi did not detect them. Darrow Fane came up from the fighter bays in the middle of the waiting period and stood near Petra's station for a while. He was the wing lead for the Relentless's 72 fighters, and he had been doing equipment checks for the past 2 days straight. He looked at the formation on the passive display. He looked at the drone tracks. He did not ask questions. He had been briefed. He just wanted to see it with his own eyes for a moment. He told Petra it was a good spread. She said she knew. He went back down to the bays. Voss spent most of the 14 hours at the back of the bridge. He drank water. He read status reports. He did not pace. He had done things like this before, not exactly like this, but close enough that the waiting did not bother him. The waiting was the plan. The waiting was the weapon. When the drone position confirmation came back, all 24 drones inside the formation, holding station, undetected, Petra pulled up the detonation grid and walked Voss through the target assignments one more time. 4 ships flagged for primary disruption. 2 backup assignments if any of the primary runs failed. The fuel ships were not on the detonation list. She had other plans for them. Voss approved the grid. He told her to hold on his mark. She said, "Yes, Admiral." The Dravathi fleet sat at anchor around the relay station, engines cooling, crews rotating through rest cycles. Fleet Commander Sarath filed an updated report to Grand Admiral Seth. He said the corridor sweep would begin ahead of schedule. He said the humans had made no aggressive moves. He said the operation was proceeding exactly as planned. 24 drones drifted silently inside his formation. Nobody on any of his 8 ships had the faintest idea. Voss said, "Mark." All 24 drones fired at once. They were not explosive in the conventional sense. Each one carried a dense magnetic pulse core that, when triggered, released a directional electromagnetic burst powerful enough to fry every unshielded drive component within 40 meters. The Dravathi ships were not shielded against this. There was no reason to shield against it. Nobody had ever deployed weapons like this in a fleet action before. The pulse was not a known combat technique. It was not in any Dravathi tactical database. 4 warships lost engine function in the same second. The effect was immediate and total. No warning, no buildup. One moment the ships were at anchor, engines idling, crews going about their rotations. The next moment every drive system on 4 separate vessels simply stopped. Emergency lighting kicked on. Backup systems tried to initialize and found nothing to connect to. Captains started shouting for damage reports, and the damage reports made no sense because there was no visible damage, no hull breaches, no fires, no projectile impacts. The engines were just gone. Then the jamming hit. Every communications frequency in the formation went static. Fleet-to-fleet channels, the relay station link, emergency bands, all of it buried under a dense noise field that the Relentless had been holding ready for exactly this moment. The 8 ships were suddenly 8 separate problems, unable to talk to each other, unable to reach the relay station, unable to call for help. On Sarath's bridge, the first reports came in fast and made no sense at all. He stood at his command station and listened to his officers try to explain what had happened. No projectiles had been detected. No ships had appeared on sensors. Nothing had fired. There were no drive signatures, no targeting locks, no energy weapons discharge, nothing on any sensor that explained why 4 of his ships had just gone dark. His tactical officer said it could be a sensor error. Sarath said 4 simultaneous engine failures were not a sensor error. His communications officer said all external channels were down. Sarath told him to keep trying. For 6 minutes, nobody on any of the 8 ships could explain what had happened. 6 minutes of running every diagnostic, pulling every scan log, cross-referencing every passive reading from the past 24 hours. 6 minutes of Dravathi officers who were trained, experienced, and genuinely skilled at their work coming up completely empty. Then the Relentless turned on. Not all of it, just the stealth suppression field. Petra pulled the stealth field down for exactly 87 seconds, and the passive displays across every ship in the corridor lit up with a single return, massive, close, wrong in every possible way. A ship signature that was larger than anything in the Dravathi fleet registry. A ship that had been sitting inside the debris field for 19 days without emitting a single detectable particle. Sareth stared at the return on his display. His tactical officer said he did not recognize the class. Nobody recognized the class. The Relentless opened its flight deck doors, and Darrow Fane let his wing out at full burn. 72 fighters came out of the debris field in two tight groups, running dark until they cleared the rocks, then lighting drives simultaneously and hitting combat velocity inside 8 seconds. They were already inside sensor range of the fleet before the Dravathi could process what the carrier return had meant. By the time anyone on the 8 ships had a targeting solution worth anything, the fighters were inside minimum engagement distance for the warship's main batteries. Sareth ordered point defense systems active. His point defense gunners did their jobs. They were good. They got kills. But 72 fighters at close range, coming from multiple vectors with no warning, were not a problem that point defense was designed to handle. Point defense was designed for missiles and drones at distance. These were crewed fighters moving at angles that required the guns to track faster than the targeting systems could compute. Darrow's wing hit the 2 nearest cruisers with their first pass, not trying to destroy them, trying to blind them. Sensor arrays, communications nodes, external antenna clusters, small, fast, precise strikes that turned capable warships into confused ones. Then the Relentless disappeared again. 87 seconds after it had appeared, the stealth field came back on, and the enormous carrier signature vanished from every display in the formation. Sareth's tactical officer called out the loss of contact, and there was nothing to say in response to it. It had been there. Now it was not. They had no targeting data worth using because 87 seconds was not long enough to build a solution against a contact that size. The fighters were still among them. Sareth grabbed his console with both hands and tried to turn the chaos into something he could work with. He had 4 dead ships, full jamming, 72 hostile fighters in his formation, and a carrier-class vessel of unknown type that had just proven it could appear and disappear at will. He had been in combat for 30 years. He had never been in anything like this. He told his tactical officer to find that carrier. His tactical officer said he could not. There was nothing on sensors. The fighters made their second pass. 2 of Sareth's warships were gone within the first 15 minutes. Not destroyed in the traditional sense. The fighters had not tried to crack them open. They had gone after drive cores, reactor cooling lines, and weapon systems in a sequence so methodical it felt planned down to the individual component. Because it was. Petra had spent weeks building a kill priority list for every known Dravathi ship class in this formation. Darrow's pilots had memorized it. They were not flying by instinct. They were executing a diagram. The 2 ships tumbled away from the formation, unpowered, leaking atmosphere in thin streams. 2 more were badly hurt. The remaining 4 were still functional but operating without communications and with degraded sensor capability from the first pass strikes on their arrays. Sareth was doing the counting. He had 8 ships when this started. Now he had 4 that could fight and 4 that could not. He had no contact with the carrier. He had no contact with the relay station. He had no way to reach Grand Admiral Seth. His fighters had managed to down 6 of the human craft, which was something, but 66 were still active and hitting him in rotation, one group attacking while the other turned for another pass. They were not in a hurry. That was the thing that stuck with him. They were not fighting desperately. They were managing him. He ordered his 4 functional ships to pull toward the relay station and regroup. If he could get to the station, He could use its communications array to reach Seth.